Thanks, team. If you're a visitor this morning and if the rain gets a bit crazy, just know that we do have these headsets up the back. You're very welcome to grab a set of those. They'll just shoot my voice straight into your brain. They're quite helpful, particularly if it gets a bit noisy with the rain on the roof. You can also head out with the kids if you need to be with your little ones, and the headphones work out there as well. Last week, we explored the profound truth that through our connection with Christ, we are called to embody God's covenant by living out his wisdom within our world. Jesus' ultimate mission was not to abolish the law and the prophets, the Hebrew scriptures, but to fulfill them, revealing God's wisdom, revealing his heavenly ideal in all of its fullness. Recognizing that we can't do this in and of ourselves, we saw also that this greater righteousness that Christ calls us to is only possible through close communion with himself. And yet this greater righteousness is not merely something that we accept as a free gift, we are then commanded to live it out. And this doesn't mean just following a set of rules with, external obedience checkers, but going well beyond the simple rule book checklisting by having a heart that is transformed by the wisdom of God himself. Jesus moved beyond this general principle then and provided some concrete examples of what this might look like to interpret the law of Moses in the light of his own fulfillment of it. And he reveals God's standard of living for those living in Jesus' greater righteousness within the context of the day-to-day lives of the average Joe that he was speaking to up on the hilltop in Israel in those days. As followers of Jesus, these teachings are about as concrete and practical as teaching gets. So if we want to know what a Christian life looks like, if we want to know what it looks like to be the kind of kingdom people expressed in the Beatitudes, here are some good pointers in the right direction. Jesus addressed key areas of human relationships: anger, adultery, divorce, demonstrating how in many ways the law of Moses was a concession to God's heavenly ideal. God's desire for mankind is not just about following rules, but about a heart posture that honors and values others as God does. But Jesus doesn't just throw the law under the bus, or the chariot, or the donkey. But he reveals that the actual heart posture behind these rules is what God really desires. So this week we'll examine the second set of case studies, beginning with this one. From Matthew chapter 5, 33 to 37, if you're reading along in your own Bibles. Otherwise it's up on the screen here. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows that you have made." Now, first up, true to form, Jesus takes a teaching from the law of Moses that Israel had been trying to live by. It's not a direct quote, but you kind of get the idea from passages like Leviticus 19, 11 to 12, Numbers 30, 1 to 2, and Deuteronomy 23, verses 21 and 23. Essentially, an oath was a public promise or commitment. The law of Moses said that if you make an oath to God, you need to keep it. And if you make a promise to people, you need to keep that too. Now, what Israel and the human race as a whole has worked out is that we can make a promise sound way more powerful by appealing to a god, or to appeal to our father's grave, or our grandmother's spoon collection, or something that sounds equally grand, yeah? And certainly in the ancient world, an oath made to your particular god would make folks trust what you're saying, because swearing by God was a big deal. Israel figured out that if they made an oath by something that still sounds awesome, but isn't actually God, Maybe they weren't bound to the same level of honesty that they would be if they really swore by God. Scott McKnight, in his excellent commentary on this passage, calls it truth scaling. Oh, I'm telling you the truth, mostly. And you can see how this would be helpful for a Jew making a shady business transaction with a merchant from another country. Yeah? Hey, you give me these items now, and I'll pay you back next month. And the foreign merchant says, well, how do I know that you will? And of course, the Jewish merchant could say, oh, I make an oath before the great city of Jerusalem, location of the temple of the Most High, that I will pay you back. And the foreign merchant figures, well, that sounds awfully grand. He must be telling the truth. And so he thinks he's going away with a strong promise of payment in a month's time. And the Israelite merchant thinks he's gotten away with a shady deal that wasn't binding under the law of Moses, because he technically didn't make the vow to Yahweh. So again, Jesus doesn't do away with the law. He highlights the ideal behind it that some folks thought that they had cleverly sidestepped. Here's Jesus' words. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you can't even make one hair white or black. Jesus isn't saying we can't make promises. He's saying that when we promise to do something, we shouldn't use grandiose words as a way to manipulate other people. And he makes it clear by pointing out that it doesn't matter what you swear by. Everything is God's anyway, including Grandma's spoon collection. So even by swearing by your own self, you might as well be making an oath in the name of God who made you. And here's the point. We live in a world that runs based on selective truths. If you're skilled at getting ahead, you will know to say something that makes people think that they know what you're saying, but you're actually not saying that. This is politics 101. This is advertising 101. So Jesus concludes, all you need to say is yes or no. Anything else beyond this comes from the evil one. What Jesus is pointing to is that in the kingdom, what you say has to be what you mean. And by joining in with the rest of the world by scaling our truth, we are playing the game that was introduced to humanity by the serpent himself in Genesis 3. Interestingly, this suggests that even if we are telling the truth, when we make a public oath by something, it's as if we're giving allegiance to the devil's game. That's a challenging thought. I think this leads me to question whether I'd be happy to put my hand on a Bible and swear to tell the truth in the court of law. Interesting question, isn't it? And there's Christians who stand on both sides of this argument. I have been forced to give this a lot more thought since my wife called me out on the question. Because initially, I took the view, similar to John Piper, that I wouldn't swear by the Bible, but instead would say that, that I intended to tell the truth without an oath, because I obey the God of truth, who has asked me not to make such oaths. However, after more thought, I think that there's an important difference in the two situations that perhaps makes me more comfortable with the idea of laying my hands on a Bible in a courtroom setting. You could take this and leave this, but the difference is what I'm intending to do there. By making an oath in order to manipulate people, I would be doing the wrong thing. But in a court setting, everyone is supposed to be there in order to do truth and justice. That's the entire point of being there. And so I'm not swearing for my own gain, and I'm not swearing to deceive people. I'm swearing to join with everyone else in that common pursuit of truth and justice. So perhaps there is an element of a difference there between what Jesus was speaking against and our more modern Western idea of swearing in the court of law. feel free to keep chewing on that with me, okay? Jesus' requirement is for his followers to live such lives of honesty and truth that people know our word is actually counting for something. Now, if you unintentionally break a promise to your kid, like I do sometimes, because we forgot something or some other circumstance, does that mean that you and I are evil? Well, we are a little bit, but not in the worst sense. What it means is that we need to ask forgiveness of our children because we are broken human beings, and we need to model that before our kids and show them our desire to be more like Christ, even if we mess up. That's important. But what if we were to blow this up to the worst case scenario? What would I do if I were living in China in an underground church and they were meeting in my basement? And the secret police knocked on my door and they asked if there were any Christians downstairs. Is lying okay to protect the innocent from evil? I don't have an easy answer to that one. And Jesus doesn't specifically address it. What Jesus is talking about here is the day-to-day lives of regular people sitting in front of him. And it applies very clearly to our day-to-day lives too. But if I were to hazard a guess, I would suggest that Jesus' example at his pre-trial before the Sanhedrin maybe gives us a clue to what to do when we blow this to its end point. The high priest said to Jesus in Matthew 26, from verse 63, I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said so, Jesus replied. But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. When asked under the name of God, Jesus neither confirms nor denies. But he drops a whole bunch of truth bombs along the way. Similarly, when questioned by Pilate, Jesus either stays silent or responds with truth bombs that are not directly answering the question that was asked. He's answering the question Pilate probably should have asked, but didn't. It's as though Jesus was standing there at the moment of the most deathly consequences, and he responds by refusing to play the game. Instead, he was living under the rules of a completely different game, a greater kingdom and a heavenly ideal. Now, only a few verses later in the book of Matthew, his disciple Peter was provided the same opportunity not to play the game. And instead of following Jesus' example, Peter makes an oath to protect himself, denying that he even knows Jesus. A moment of weakness that caused him great sorrow and shame until he met and was forgiven by the risen Christ. Now, perhaps this example is all the commentary we need. Jesus continues in his sermon then with the next case study of greater righteousness from Matthew 5:38. He says, you've heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Yep, straight out of the law of Moses. It's in Exodus 21, Leviticus 24, Deuteronomy 19. The idea is that justice should be measured out in a manner that fits the crime. The reason this idea was important is that in the ancient world, if someone did something to you, you would do something worse to them. And they would turn around and do something even worse to you. So you would turn around and do something even worse to them. So eye for an eye, this principle not only ensured that justice was done, but that justice was measured, that justice had a clear end. It was designed to protect society from descending into the kind of endless fighting and chaos that plagued the social fabric of the ancient world, and the same for our world now. It was there to curb the escalation of harmful retaliation, to stop the dangerous element of limitless tit-for-tatting so that Israel could eliminate the evil from their midst and not continue that rolling effect. Israelites could expect that justice could and would be measured out, but the punishment could and would be only the same magnitude as the crime that was committed. Scribes and rabbis debated this in Jesus' day. You'd be surprised that scribes and rabbis were debating. Some pointing out that if a homeless person burns down someone else's home, well, you can't very well burn down the homeless person's home, can you? Loophole. And so a sophisticated 5-part rule of financial compensation was arrived at and developed by the rabbinic writings. It's all written down in the Talmud. And similar to our modern idea of paying damages, a monetary amount was decided on that was equal to whatever material or physical or mental damage had been inflicted. Other Jewish leaders stuck to a much more literal reading of the scriptures and wanted to do to the perpetrator exactly what was done to the victim. Now, this is still very much the way Muslims follow the Sharia law, how they see it. There's an example I read about a woman who was blinded by an acid attack, and she was then given the opportunity to return the favor by literally blinding her attacker with acid. Now, the question that I have is, will taking revenge, even exactly measured revenge, actually create peace between these people? No. The best it can do is limit the bloodshed. So it's a pointer towards a better way forward, but it isn't God's ideal because it doesn't bring people together. Now, let me just point out there is a vast difference between Muslim Sharia law and what the Jews practice or ever have. But Jesus steps this all up to the next level. He says, but, moreover, and, remember that word? I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Wait, what? How's that going to help? Sounds like just laying down and letting someone walk all over you, doesn't it? And that's how some folks read it. But I actually think Jesus is suggesting something way more intentional. Not to become a doormat, but don't seek justice or retribution for yourself. Instead, expose the darkness and force it to come out and be seen and exposed to public ridicule. Let me explain. And to do that, we're going to need to understand the context of Jesus' world. So in Jesus' world, a backhanded slap, was an insult, reserved for those who you deemed were below you, be a slave or a prisoner or someone that you just wanted to humiliate. Assuming most people were right-handed, a slap on the right cheek suggests one of these insulting slaps. Now, in the Jewish rabbinic writings called the Mishnah, the legal cost of a front-handed slap was 200 zuz. But a backhanded slap, that was 400 zuz. That was twice as bad. By telling his listeners to turn the other cheek, Jesus is providing an incredibly powerful response to his followers. If someone's just insulted you with a right-handed, backhanded slap, demeaning you, and making the statement that they are above you, turn the other cheek. Let them slap you again, but this time they have to do it with an open palm. This time it's as an equal. And assuming it's out in public, this time they'll have to publicly acknowledge you as an equal. And what it does is make a statement about what's been done to you. It's a statement about the attacker and their character. And it forces the world to stop and look and see what's happening. They might have missed the first one, they ain't going to miss the second. It forces the attacker to consider what they are doing and make a choice whether they're going to continue or they're going to stop. What about the shirt thing? This is weird too. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, Jesus says, hand over your coat as well. Well, according to the law of Moses, you were not allowed to take someone's coat as security. In those days, your coat was also your blanket. So if you owed someone, or they were going to take you to court the next day and didn't want you to skip town, they weren't allowed to keep your coat overnight because that was also your blanket. And it wasn't fair to have someone freeze at night just so that you could be sure they weren't going to skip on town, right? In Jesus' example here, the person knows that they can't take your coat, and so they're going to take your shirt instead. You see how subtle that is? I'm going to obey the law strictly. I'm still going to get what I want. Now, your shirt was the only other piece of clothing that you had as an Israelite. You had a shirt, robe thing, and you had an overrobe coat thing. This guy is obeying the strict law of Moses, but still making a power play over you. And so it appears what Jesus is suggesting is to strip. Go over to their front door, in front of their neighbours and the weird lady across the road who watches everything, give them your shirt and give them your coat and stand there in your loincloth. Expose what's going on. And at the very least, you will know that you are not playing their game. And more than likely, such a shameful act is going to force the perpetrator to rethink his actions. And the people around you are going to consider acting on your behalf because what's going on doesn't seem okay. Following this same concept, Jesus says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. Go with them 2. Remember, Israel was an occupied territory. There were Roman soldiers and Roman strongholds in almost every major town and city. And one of the well-known Roman laws stated that a Roman soldier was able to force any common Jew to carry their war gear, their spear, their helmet, their bags, for 1 Roman million, which was 1,000 paces, somewhere around 1.5 kilometres, depending on how big your pace was, I guess. There was no option to say no, assuming you enjoyed breathing. But after 1.5 Ks, you were free. Jesus is saying, don't go free. Go an extra 1.5 Ks carrying that soldier's gear. Saying, in effect, this is Mick's version, I'm not playing your game. I did the first lot because I had to. I'm doing the second lot because I choose to. I'm not just your slave. I'm a person, and I am forcing you to see me as such. Not only that, I'm highlighting the injustice and making a mockery of it by doing good to you, the one who has done evil to me. Now, if you've been watching the Chosen series, you might love it, you might hate it, it doesn't matter. It's a good, albeit in artistic interpretation of Jesus' life, yeah? You might remember there's this moment where they cast Jesus and his disciples as literally having to live out this command. And the response of the soldiers in this clip, in that scene, is absolutely priceless. It is worth a watch, yeah? I've put the link to the clip in the sermon notes if you want to have a look. But the heart posture of all these 3 case studies is one of treating others as we would have them treat us. Of dealing with people as image bearers of God himself and showing them that they should be doing the same. Of not seeking our own gain necessarily, or our own good, or our own justice by taking it upon ourselves, but of living in a way that doesn't play by the serpent's rules. Rather, it highlights it and it exposes it for what it is. This is also reflected in the next statement. Jesus says, give to the one who asks you and do not turn away the one who wants to borrow from you. Give, be generous. Remember, everything that we have is a gift from God anyway. The expectation here is that even though you are well within your rights to expect interest on a loan, don't ask for interest. Don't even exact payment. We could play the world's game and get ahead by giving only if we get in return, but that's not the way the kingdom works. God doesn't ask for interest when he sends rain on the just and the unjust, and neither should we. Okay, elephant in the room. Can we ever seek justice against evil people? Yes, I think we can. Remember, the Beatitudes suggest that it is those who mourn over the darkness of our world, those who are merciful to the people around them, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness to be done. These are the people through whom God works his kingdom. God isn't against the right thing being done. In fact, Micah 6:8 says, "And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?" God's kingdom ideal isn't anti-justice. Justice is a part of God's very nature. We only know justice because God has revealed it to us. God's kingdom ideal is against revenge, against getting for yourself at the expense of another, be they good or evil. And so practically for us, I believe that Jesus' words provide us with wisdom that will help us to learn how to respond to evil people with non-violent, non-retaliatory responses. So that when we are dealt with unjustly, that we can respond in a way that says, "I'm not playing the devil's game here," that forces the unjust action to be exposed and revealed for the evil and the shame that it is. And it provides the opportunity for the wrongdoer to see us differently and change their own actions, opening the door, at least from our side, for that relationship to be restored. And perhaps even encourages the watching world to step in and ensure that justice is done. And it's important, I think, to point out that as a church, there is nothing wrong with looking for justice in support of someone else who has been wronged. The legal system that we enjoy in Australia was based upon the kind of justice principles outlined in the Bible. We don't seek it for ourselves, but we can most certainly offer it on behalf of others. And this is good. Tempered by the knowledge that the punishment should never exceed the offence. And also with the awareness of the desires of the victim, right? Loving kindness so that we never seek punishment of someone if the victim would actually prefer mercy. Now, this all rolls neatly into one final case study that in many ways sums up the whole previous section. And it's a great one. And we're going to save it till next week. I think that's enough for this morning. I know. Oh, yeah. Isn't it great to just dig into the Lord's word? Yeah? And I encourage you during this week to prayerfully consider this teaching, to prayerfully consider Jesus' words and say, God, Holy Spirit, teach us as a church community to know what you're doing here. Change our hearts. Help us to grow in wisdom and to follow you each and every day. That's our prayer. Amen.